Hello and welcome to another one of my impressions videos. I didn't reshoot this one. I did say when I did the Alicat one that I might go away and reshoot these because I wasn't too sure about the sound quality. It seemed to be a sound issue which I was unable to resolve. But I decided that I couldn't be bothered essentially reshooting all of the videos. I can't really see what the problem is, to be honest, although somebody who's a little more technical minded out there might know. But anyway, this is Exolon, I think that's how it's pronounced, on the Commodore 64 plug and play. And this is another game that I had back in the day when the C64 was my pride and joy. And it was always a tough game back then, and the additional years gaming experience that I've had hasn't changed that. It's still a very, very tough game. In some respects, it's also quite tough in an unfair sort of way, as you'll see there. But that was par for the course in the 8-bit era. Games were a lot tougher. They had to last a while, and the developers really didn't have a lot to work with. Games were tough because essentially they didn't have to fall. They couldn't fall back on 8 to 10 hours of gameplay because there wasn't the storage capacity on the cassettes, and in the UK the majority of games was for 8-bit home computers like the Commodore 64, the Spectrum, the Amstrad. The majority was sold on cassette. Floppy disks weren't that popular over here for whatever reason. I think it's because they didn't come, well, especially in the case of the Commodore 64, they didn't come with the machine as standard. And that really did cripple the capabilities somewhat. It made games which were multi-load almost intolerably painful, because you had to mess around resetting tape counters, fast forwarding, rewinding, and eventually the damn tapes would stretch and the game would stop working. It was always a major pain in the backside, and floppy disks would have completely eradicated that problem, but it wasn't to be. Anyway, back to this game. Yeah, it's tough, but I really do enjoy playing it. It works quite well with the Commodore plug and play controller, which is a pretty good thing, because if it didn't, there were certain areas of this game would be nigh on impossible. That said, I did notice a couple of issues the more I played the game, because you're essentially going from left to right. I had to be very conscious and very precise with the controller, because sometimes the guy would jump when I didn't want him to, and other times he'd crouch when I didn't want him to. So that kind of made a bit of a problem. It's like in this bit here, he would not jump and go to the right. I had to take a running jump and go to the right, which is not what I wanted to do, and he ends up getting shot and then gets his backside blown off by a landmine. So, but overall, I mean, it wasn't that much of a problem. The game is quite generous in the lives that it gives you, but you can die quite easily. Well, you do die quite easily in this. There's no if, buts, or maybes about it. This is a hard game, and I'd say it's just typical of the games of the day. It's another Hewson game that was on this collection, and I wonder if the games that were selected for this collection were games that the publisher or developer of the games, whoever owned the intellectual property of the games, just doesn't exist anymore and was never bought out by another company, or if they were, the company that licensed these games to the manufacturers of this joypad did so at a very cheap price. But that's not a problem because they're good games. It just would have been nice to have seen some offerings from other 8-bit developers of the time. But I don't think that was ever going to happen. The other companies, I think US Gold, I'm not too sure. I'm sure there's more learned people out there when it comes to retro gaming, but I'm sure US Gold ended up being bought by Activision, and No Ocean got bought by Infogrames, which I assume were bought out in turn or became part of Ubisoft or whatever. So I imagine getting hold of the IP for a lot of the classic 8-bit games of the era would be very difficult, and I think that's a great shame. I think they should be made more readily available. But anyway, yeah. I have no idea what the backstory is to this game. Why my little space astronaut fella who's being killed an awful lot is doing what he's doing. I don't even know if there was any backstory back in the 80s when it first come out. But the main drawback with this plug-and-play joystick is there are no individual game instructions that I've been able to find. There are some additional buttons on the actual controller itself, but I can't seem to find what they do. In some cases, it might open up a menu within the game, but I don't know what they do. I mean, having incorporated basic controls would have been nice, because despite the fact that the C64 only had one fire button, it also used the keyboard in some games as well, which I know one of the buttons or a couple of the buttons do simulate. But there were some games where you'd hold the joypad, you'd hold the fire button down, like in the instance of this game, you held the fire button down to fire the little rocket that your man shoots out, and I would never have known that had I not played the game before. There's no clear instructions at all for it. But yeah, I think that's it. That's Exolon for the Commodore 64 plug and play, and thank you for watching this video.